recognizing that when you're young in career, that you will feel a little bit rudderless because you haven't hit your groove, i.e. your value add as a catalyst increases with expertise and age. And therefore, you kind of have to earn your stripes, your scars, your sort of battle experience first. And I would suggest that the best thing you can do in that phase is develop this network of contacts. And to do that, I think that the best thing is just to constantly act with high integrity and to apply the golden rule, which is to sort of treat others as you wish to be treated. And I've always believed that if you treat others with kindness, you may not be repaid instantly, but over the long run, you will be repaid 1,000-fold.
I'm Shannon Lucas.
And I'm Tracy Lovejoy, and we're the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to catalyzing innate change makers to accelerate positive change.
This is our podcast,
Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out,
where we highlight catalysts that are creating amazing change in the world. I'm so excited today to have time with Dr. Guido Jouret. He has more than 25 years of leadership experience in a variety of technology sectors, including software, services, networking technology, cloud platforms, and hardware. Having recently held the Chief Development Officer role at Plume, the creator of one of the most widely deployed software platforms for smart home and small businesses. He's currently a board member at Poly, an advisor to Nokia's corporate venture group, and various Silicon Valley startups. Prior to Plume, he was the Chief Digital Officer at ABB, leading its digital transformation. Before that, he was the Chief Technology Officer at Nokia Technologies, incubating its digital health business. It's so lovely to have you here today with us.
Thank you, Shannon.
So let's start off with, how do you relate to the concept of catalyst?
So I relate because I'm what's called a third culture kid. I grew up as a child of expats. And we moved around a lot, every 2 to 3 years on average. And what that means is you don't develop roots and you have to learn new languages, new schools, new friends, new everything every couple of years. So we lived on 4 continents before the age of 15. And as a result, learning how to relate to others, how to communicate, how to create a shared sense of purpose, which is what catalysts do, that is something which I think I learned at a very young age, but as a survival skill. And later on in my career, as I went and did a PhD, I realized I was just not as smart, not as deep, not as focused as many of the people that were doing those things alongside me. And what I realized only much later in my life was that my skill wasn't in going deeper, but it was in connecting these dots. It was about working with super specialized people and creating a team effort, mobilizing them to achieve something new and wonderful, which I did repeatedly over the years in many different companies.
It's so powerful, like that, the dot connecting. And it's such an interesting, we haven't done the research on like how catalysts are created. But I shared my mom was a military kid. And so she brought that into her life and I learned from her. So I think it's a super interesting thread for us to pull on. So I'd love to hear a story about, how as a catalyst you've led change over the years and maybe share some of the lessons learned.
Yeah, so I'll maybe give 2 contrasting examples. And one of the most recent sort of big catalyst experiences that I had was working at a company called ABB. And ABB is a Swedish company, has been around for over 125 years. It's in over 100 countries, very global, very distributed. And it makes everything from robots to circuit breakers to transmission equipment, everything related to the flow of electricity and how that gets turned into action. And so at ABB in 2016, the CEO hired me to lead the company's digital transformation. And industrial companies are long-lasting companies. They've been around for a long time. They have very deep customer relationships, very sort of conservative, risk-averse cultures, because of course, if you have a defect in your product, it's not just inconvenient, you can actually cause people to get hurt or worse. And so you're very much focused on safety, risk, and all the rest, and of course, reliability of these products. So as you can imagine, that's sort of at an opposite end of digital transformation, moving fast, breaking stuff, going along, right? So clearly, it's a challenging opportunity, but I welcome this opportunity. In fact, by then in my career, I had started, for example, a whole bunch of internal startups inside of Cisco. I'd done the same inside of Nokia. So I was repeatedly drawn to opportunities to create the new thing inside of the big thing. So I've never been a startup person going off to create my own company, but I'm what some people call an intrapreneur, which is I was inside of a big structure, usually mandated to go and try and create some new best thing, some growth business, some new venture. And what I loved about doing that was, one, the challenge, which was great, even though the company has a lot of resources, that they're not available to you. You have some subset of that, you have some budget. There's usually a mandate from on high. So there's a CEO in the case of ABB who was hired to essentially say, we need to drive digital transformation and capture that opportunity for the company. And that's really important, by the way, because a catalyst, I think, sort of replenishes their fuel and their energy from having that executive support. Otherwise, we burn out because we're expending our personal capital in recruiting people, getting them to move forward and to overcome obstacles and change and resistance internally, of which there's plenty, by the way, right? So there's that. So the challenge at ABB was how to develop a digital platform that we could connect all these legacy products to so that they could be cloud connected. You could take advantage of the analytics. It sounds rather simple. It's like, okay, great, take some technology, make it available. What's the problem? Well, the challenge was that of these 28 business units, which are run almost as independent companies, you can imagine knocking on the door and saying, hi, I'm here from head office, I'm here to help. And these people would look at you with some degree of suspicion and say, like, we don't need your help. But privately, what they would admit was that, well, actually, we do need help, but we're so sort of in the starting blocks, like we don't even know where to start with our digital journey, never mind like using the tools that your team is developing. So it was a willingness, I think, at some point to admit that, which allowed us to sort of then go through the door and say, okay, how do we work with you? And this was very catalytic in the sense that my job was not to create a new digital company separate from the old company where we could then move these exciting new people and all these wonderful new toys. No, the mandate was take the existing business units, the existing part of the company, and accelerate it into the future. And of course, for some people, they say like, oh my God, why did you ever take on that job? It's like, but I thrive on these challenges. And I think that's what I think you define as a characteristic of Catalyst, which is we sort of try to go for these challenges, these opportunities to affect change. And it's funny enough that I hadn't realized it until recently, but when somebody asked me what was my job inside the company, I used the term catalyst. I said, and in a strict sense, it's something you add to a chemical reaction to accelerate it. That's There's a fine sort of second rejoinder to that phrase, which is, and it's not used up in the process.
That's right. That's right.
So the idea of a catalyst, you can use it again and again, and ideally would be the case. So that was a very sort of large undertaking for about 4 years. We can talk about some lessons learned in that later. But there's a second part of being a catalyst, which is what my career has become now. So as I've walked away from doing a full-time role in order to spend a bit more time with my wife, who has a health condition, I've now started to take on a variety of consulting and advisory roles. So for example, one is with a startup with a former boss, and this startup is focused on financial wellness. So helping advise employees on how to invest their retirement funds and to do that in a semi-automatic way with this online platform that the company makes available. The second one is helping a startup that is being led by another former Cisco colleague that's focused on sustainable fishing. So I love to eat fish, but I'm not an expert in fish. But luckily for me, they want help with their engineering team. So how to set up a roadmap, how to implement a product lifecycle management approach, how to hire and build up the next generation of leaders. So this is a pure advisory capacity. In fact, all of these advisory capacity roles. And what I'm loving about them is it's almost like this catalyst concept distilled to its most pure essence, which is I don't have to manage budgets. I don't have to do performance reviews. I don't have to do any of that. I can purely focus on aligning with the interests of the people that have reached out for help. I'm not a threat to them. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to take over the company. I'm purely there to help them out. And when you do that, people sort of, the defenses come down, they relax,
I
and
can
they
feel
realize,
it.
okay,
Yeah.
you've got a lot of experience. You're here to help me, to make me better at my job. I'm grateful that my boss is paying your bills so that you're able to do this for me. Let's get started. So I think that's a wonderful thing, and I heartily recommend it to anyone who likes being part of something, to create something, to consider that you can do that in a variety of ways. And so I'm also helping another startup that's focused on mental health and wellness, which I think is specifically very important nowadays as a result of
Yes.
the stresses of COVID and drug addiction and the like. So I'm fortunate in that a lot of these opportunities have come looking for me, in part with people that I've worked with in the past. As I was a catalyst in some of these companies, I hired some of these people. They came and joined my teams. And as a result, in some cases, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, they reach out and they say, Guido, if you're available, we'd love to get your help. Can you help out? So now I have what some people have called a plural career. And I have a number of these parallel opportunities that I'm engaged in. And it's been a real, very interesting twist, very different than the corporate environment, being inside of a big machine, but also similarly very catalytic and very much influencing, advising, motivating, and creating an impact.
Okay, it sounds like a catalyst dream, like the sandbox. I also hear it's interesting, like you came full circle and you have your foot in all of these different cultures with all of these different companies, which is super interesting. I love the hope that that gives for catalysts too. It's like a lot of us will go through that big machinery, the corporate machinery, but like there's to offer people a vision of there might be a point at which, and especially because I know that you have given gifts of service and value along the way, which is why those people reached back out to you and why your network continues to support you. So there's something about like the generosity and impact that you've had allows you then to have this super catalyst friendly life. But I do want to go back because I know there were probably some lessons learned along the way from ABB to get you to where you are today. So yeah, what were some of, because also I have to say like, yeah, that thing where we knock on the door and we have to go to the other lines of business, like that's a very common catalyst experience and incredibly difficult to overcome. How did you do it? How did you deal with that?
Well, in some sense, that's why I draw the parallel between my sort of growing up overseas experience, where I was always an outsider. When you are a foreigner living in a foreign place, you're always like a fish out of water. You're always like you don't belong. You're always like you don't speak the language, which often cases you don't. So knocking on the door of these business units, each of these business units is like it's a different country. They have their own culture, their own priorities, way of doing things. And so having the skill to know how to embrace that and become credible quickly in that environment, I think helped me a lot. You have to be somewhat fearless. Now, it does help, of course, if you have a strong mandate from on high. So if you come knocking on the door and say, hi, the CEO sent me, that helps. I mean, it sort of pries open the door a bit of the way. It doesn't sort of completely fly open and they welcome you with open arms. But definitely that is necessary, I think, from time to time. Now, the other part of that is trying to convince them that you're going to add value to what they already want to do, as opposed to like, yeah, stop doing what you're doing. You now need to sort of check these boxes because my job is to get you to check these boxes so I can go back to corporate and tell them that, you know, you've been a good boy or girl and, you know, you've played along with whatever the corporate initiative is. The way that I found most effective to do that, to incite the change within the business units so that they really embrace it, was not to push from within, but to push from without. And what I mean by that was I would go and say, look, can you bring me to your customers?
Yep.
And I talk with you to your customers and ask them, what are their hopes and their frustrations and their aspirations for you? Because in so doing, you get this voice of the customer and you amplify that voice. And when I say customer, it could be investors, it could be partners, it could be all kinds. And of course, many, especially large established companies, they've sort of established a routine where they're talking to a very established set of players. They're talking to the procurement department.
That's
and
right.
Guess what? Procurement wants it, you know, faster, cheaper, better. And that's kind of it. So if you get to the true end user, though, the people who actually use the product, and you say, hey, what's working well? What can we do better? Oh my gosh, you know, information flows forth. And if you then sort of try to connect these dots, and this is where the skill of the catalyst in terms of being sort of this horizontal connector of information to turn this massive broad data into a compelling story, and then bringing that forth. So one of the things that I did often at ABB was I was invited to address our customers. So for example, we would have a customer event in Houston, 10,000 people in the room. And the CEO said, okay, Guido, I want you to talk about what's happening in the future, about where the company's headed, which if you think about it is kind of a ridiculous assignment because I was in charge of digital transformation. I was not the BU leader. I didn't have a P&L. I wasn't in charge of any business operation. But what the reason he asked was because I could connect the dots. I could create the story around what our customers were hoping the company could be and what the company could become. And that telling of the story went viral, meaning that you tell it to a large audience like this, and guess what? You have a couple of thousand of your employees sitting in that room as well.
That's right.
And they go back and they say like, oh, now I get it. I see what this thing we're doing over here is part of this greater roadmap. Oh my goodness, this is so exciting. I want to be part of that. And so it's a little bit the analogy I use. It's very lonely in the beginning because you're sort of marching down the field with your flag and you're sort of hesitating to look behind you because in the beginning there's no one there. And you're hoping that by the time you sort of get to the bottom of the hill, that an army has shown up behind you because it's self-volunteering.
That's right.
You may have some budget. You may have the ability to hire a small number of people. In my case, I hired 250, which sounds like a lot, but in a company of 150,000, it's a rounding error.
Right.
So literally you have to enlist all of these other people and inspire them because the mandate was to instill change in the existing organization, not to go and create a separate company.
There's so many nuggets there. I'm just going to recap. You didn't use this word, but the empathy that you are displaying about leaning into the internal BU stakeholders and understanding what their pain is and why they're resistant and getting them then to connect with helping them solve their problems first. But also the external empathy, because that was part of your solution was, well, let's bring the customers, let's bring the empathy in for the customers and understand what their plight is. That was a big awakening for me at Vodafone too, is like, don't listen to what Shannon said, but if the CEO of Coke comes in or Pepsi or whoever comes in and says the exact same thing, we're not talking to IT and procurement, we're talking with the line of business owners, but bringing the empathy all the way around. And the piece that catalysts forget is the empathy back in for the stakeholders. And then the other thing, which is like it's such a lot of emotional labor that I hear in your story, but you have to I realized too, half of my job was marketing and half of that half was internal, because that's how you get the people on board, et cetera. Yes. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. I would love to pivot to okay, given all of that, what do you wish that you had known? What nugget of advice would you give to a catalyst coming up now? Or what do you wish you had known when you were in your 20s?
So a lot of advice that you're given early on in your career is you have to focus on your weaknesses and turn them into strengths. I tried that and I wasn't very good at it. And I realized later on that that was a fool's errand. Yeah. And what I should have figured out is take your strength and do more of that. The problem being that at 22, 26, or whatever age you sort of finally finish school, you don't really know yet what your strengths and weaknesses are. And initially, I felt that I had to go deep. I had to be an expert. I had to know more about certain topics than other people. And I went from IT into pre-sales consulting and then into R&D. And it only dawned on me literally, I think sort of in my 40s, that the red thread or the common element of all of this was that I was never going to be as deep as the specialists in each of these domains. However, my gift was the ability to zoom out, see the bigger picture, tell that story, and inspire others to come and join my cause. And it sounds somewhat fuzzy and it sounds somewhat less concrete than you're the world's best programmer in Python or whatever that you can explain more sort of concretely. But what dawned on me in my 40s was that this skill, which initially, you can't do this at 22. You can't say, well, I'm a generalist and I connect the dots really well, because you say, well, gee, you have no life experience to connect. You're just getting started. So unfortunately, you do have to sort of go through a number of jobs and accumulate expertise in these vertical silos before you can sort of rise to the top of this and say now that I have some understanding of different domains, I can start weaving them together. I can create this tapestry. And it was in my 40s that I realized that. So I would say that to the younger self, don't give up, in the sense that if you feel like you're not very deep or not very expert in each of these domains, think of it as sort of charging your batteries or sort of preparing to become a decathlete as opposed to just a sprinter or just somebody who does marathons or something that's highly specialized. And that is, to me, the gift. And the reason why I'm actually very fortunate, I think, is that this gift of being a generalist, of connecting multiple things, is more valuable the more life experience you have. So I feel like I'm better at this now in my 50s than I was in my 40s, and I hope to be better as time goes by in the future.
So good. So good. Yes, listen to that. All right. So what would you tell executives? What advice would you give executives about engaging or finding their catalysts?
So for me, I find that my ability to inspire others to come and rally to whatever change effort that I was trying to lead was directly driven by two ingredients. One is my own personal passion for the topic. The second was, of course, a strong mandate from whoever put me in that role.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've also realized is when that sponsor goes, when that sponsor leaves because of org change, or they go and find a different job in a different company, then it's almost like somebody amputates one of your limbs. It's like a certain amount of your energy, your enthusiasm ebbs away, and it's very difficult to sustain that all by yourself. It's also difficult for your team because they recognize that you are a channel through which sort of this executive support is flowing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that you are useful and powerful to that executive is because you're implementing that person's vision.
Yeah.
And the moment that that person drops away, they worry that the mandate, the authority, the influencing will be diminished. And so that is one of those things that I found really important to try and sustain as long as possible. And where I found myself running out of steam was when my sponsor went away.
Yeah. It's a classic catalyst sort of pitfall or challenge that we run into when that sponsor goes away. Totally. Okay. What's the worst part about being a catalyst?
I think the worst part is often that it's a lonely endeavor, in the sense that your mandate is to affect some change. So therefore, you're always going to be swimming upstream.
Mm-hmm.
You'll always be going against the tide. You'll always be trying to do something different. Most people don't come to work saying, like, I really want to upend my job today. Most people don't. Most people say, like, I want to do the same thing I did yesterday, get paid a lot of money for it, and not have to work too hard. So you're kind of the opposite of all those things. You're saying, like, well, actually, I want to stress you out. I want to make you worried about, the future. I need you to get excited about the future, but I also want you to realize you got to do a lot of work to make that future happen. And so it's a lonely endeavor, which has its rewards from time to time, but it does feel somewhat like you are, again, marching down this field with your little flag and your little army behind you. And you realize, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? I am trying to turn the tide or prevent the tide from coming in. And I don't know if I will be able to do that. And so I think it was Winston Churchill who said, success is going from failure to failure with undiminished enthusiasm. It does require some element of that, but I don't think you do this unless you're actually by nature an optimist.
Mm-hmm.
The counterpart, or what keeps me going, which is maybe sort of the flip side, is that while it is a very lonely job, the redeeming gift has been always that there are so many people whose lives I've had a chance to influence, and I was just giving them a job. But the number of people who tell me years later, that experience of being part of your team, being part of that change effort, being part of that new thing when I had given up hope, I didn't think I was going to stay, has been transformative. And it's been transformative to their careers, to their families, to their outlook on life. It has given them enthusiasm. I wasn't aware of this until many years later. People came and sought me out and said, I just want to tell you a story. 10 years ago, you said XYZ, and that really changed things for me. And I'm going like, wow, really? I had no idea. So that is a wonderful thing. Now that unfortunately comes later, so it doesn't help you in the moment. But it does, I think, validate for me this choice of lifestyle, career, and path that I'm on, and why I wouldn't change it for the world.
It's beautiful. I have a question for you, and I'm not sure I know the answer myself. Do you think it gets lonelier the higher up in the organization you go?
Actually, no, I think it doesn't. What I'm finding now in sort of this new plural career part of my life, as I'm trying to help these various organizations, one of the gifts that I have is this Rolodex of contacts of people that I've gotten to know over the years. Mm-hmm. And I'm calling them up and saying, like, hey, you're an expert in XYZ. The current team I'm advising could use some help. Would you be willing to spend an hour with us, share your wisdom? There's nothing in it for you, but it would sure help me out. And almost without exception, people have said like, of course, right away, no problem. And what I realized with that is that these networks, these webs of contacts, these sort of collection of individuals that has been sort of fun to work with, that have become friends over time, transcends any one company. They are not beholden to their employers. They are beholden, or they are part of your life. And as a result, I feel so nourished and sustained, because one of the fears I had as I gave up my full-time employment was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be completely alone. I'm going to be out there sitting at home in my home office, and I don't have the camaraderie of the workspace. I don't have a whole bunch of people. I don't have a mission. I don't have a mandate. And what I've learned to discover is that these people that are out there are willing to pitch in to help out any way possible. And what's been great, and the other thing I've been doing, which is not really related to work, but as a result of career changes in many of these people's lives, they find themselves in situations where they're between jobs and wondering what to do next. And what I love doing is I reach out to them, and we have sort of video chats, and we talk about that, and they seek out other people for advice. I connect them to other people I know. So I'm going like, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so, and I'll introduce them. They go off and have a great chat. They feel more motivated because they might be down from having lost their job and not knowing what to do next. And that is also, I think, frankly, such an easy and wonderful gift.
I agree. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Okay, any final call to action for the Catalyst listening?
I think that back to working on your strengths. I think the challenge, of course, when you're young in career is it's hard to understand what you're good at and what you're not good at. Certain things can help, Myers-Briggs test, profiles, a number of things. What I think I didn't do earlier, which I wish I had done, is some people advise that you should get your personal board of directors, i.e. a collection of individuals who are willing to give you tough advice, who are willing to sort of say, no, you shouldn't do that, you don't do this well, or this isn't for you. Because you can sell yourself into thinking that this new opportunity is wonderful when it's probably not a great fit for you. I wish I had done that earlier. I do that now with others, so I give them advice. So I'm on the giving end, not the receiving side. But I do seek it out more, especially when I'm thinking about whether to take on a new consultancy or a new piece of sort of advice. And I think recognizing that when you're young in career, that you will feel a little bit rudderless because you haven't hit your groove, i.e. your value add as a catalyst increases with expertise and age. And therefore, you kind of have to earn your stripes, your scars, your sort of battle experience first. And I would suggest that the best thing you can do in that phase is develop this network of contacts. And to do that, I think that the best thing is just to constantly act with high integrity and to apply the golden rule, which is to sort of treat others as you wish to be treated. And I've always believed that if you treat others with kindness, you may not be repaid instantly, but over the long run, you will be repaid 1,000-fold.
Amen to that. Looking forward to seeing where all of your exciting endeavors take you, helping with climate change and the fish and all of the mental wellness. Thank you so much for joining us, Guido.
Thank you, Shannon.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to accelerate positive change, go to our website at catalystconstellations.com. And of course, be sure to check out the book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out. If you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again for listening.